The notice taped to my front door fluttered in the October wind, a bright orange violation that made my blood pressure spike the moment I spotted it coming home from work. I ripped it down and read the first line. Violation. Unauthorized firewood storage in non-compliant location. Fine. $500, increasing by $100 weekly until rectified. My woodpile. They were fining me for my woodpile that had been in the same spot for 3 years, ever since I bought this property in Ashland, Oregon. I crumpled the paper in my fist and looked at the neat stack of split oak and Douglas fir I had spent the past month preparing for winter. The pile sat exactly where it had always been, tucked against the back corner of my property line, barely visible from the street. The previous owner, an elderly man named Mr. Henderson, had stored his wood there for over a decade. When I bought the house, he specifically told me that spot was perfect because it stayed relatively dry and out of the way. The name at the bottom of the violation notice was Susan Carmichael, HOA president. I had heard whispers about Susan from my neighbors. She had taken over as president 6 months ago and immediately started what everyone called her beautification campaign, which seemed to be code for finding reasons to fine anyone whose property did not match her vision of suburban perfection. I went inside and tossed my keys on the kitchen counter harder than necessary. My golden retriever, Max, trotted over with his tail wagging, completely oblivious to my frustration. I scratched behind his ears and pulled out my phone to call the HOA management company. After navigating through 4 automated menus, I finally reached a human who sounded like she would rather be anywhere else. This is Keith Peterson. I just got a violation notice about my firewood storage. Let me pull up your account. Keyboard clicks filled the silence. Yes, Mr. Peterson. You are in violation of Section 7.3 of the HOA covenants, which states that firewood must be stored in approved enclosures or at least 20 feet from any property line. That woodpile has been there since before I bought the house 3 years ago. Nobody said anything about it during inspection or closing. The previous violations do not excuse current non-compliance, Mr. Peterson. Who complained about it? That information is confidential. You have 14 days to remedy the situation or the fine will increase. I ended the call and immediately pulled out the massive folder of documents from when I purchased the house. Somewhere in there had to be something about this. I spread everything across my dining room table. The closing documents, the home inspection report, the property survey, the HOA covenants and restrictions. I spent the next 2 hours reading through dense legal language until my eyes burned. The HOA covenants were dated 2018, just 7 years ago. The document stated that the Meadowbrook Estates Home Owners Association was formed to maintain property values and ensure aesthetic consistency throughout the development. Section 7.3 did indeed mention firewood storage requirements. But my house was built in 1987, more than 30 years before this HOA existed. I grabbed my phone and called my real estate agent, Marcus Williams. He answered on the 3rd ring, sounding out of breath. Keith, good to hear from you. How's the house treating you? Marcus, did you know about HOA restrictions on firewood when I bought this place? Firewood, that's oddly specific. Let me think. The HOA was pretty new when you bought, right? They had just incorporated a few months before your closing. That's what I'm seeing in these documents. But they're trying to fine me for something that's been there for years. That's tricky. You might want to talk to a lawyer, but I seem to remember something unusual about your property during the title search. Let me dig through my files and get back to you. After we hung up, I decided to do something I should have done earlier. I needed to talk to my neighbor, Frank Richardson. Frank was in his 70s and had lived on this street since the houses were built. If anyone knew the history of this development, it would be him. I walked across my yard to Frank's house. He was in his garage organizing tools on a pegboard. Classic rock played from a paint-splattered radio in the corner. "Frank, you got a minute?" He turned around and smiled. "Keith, always got time for you. What's going on?" I showed him the violation notice. His smile faded as he read it. "Susan Carmichael," he said with disgust. "That woman has made it her personal mission to harass everyone on this street. My woodpile has been there for years. Mr. Henderson stored his wood in the exact same spot." Frank nodded. "I remember. Jim Henderson was meticulous about this property. He would never have done anything that violated any rules." He paused and scratched his chin. "You know what's interesting? When these houses were built, there was no HOA. We didn't want one. We liked keeping our properties the way we wanted them. So how did the HOA get formed? About 7 years ago, a development company bought the empty lots at the end of the street and built those new houses. You know, the ones with the stone facades. They established an HOA for their little section, and then somehow convinced the county that the entire street should be part of it. Some legal mumbo-jumbo about maintaining infrastructure. Most of us old-timers were grandfathered in for a lot of things, but they keep pushing the boundaries. This was getting more interesting. Do you know anything about variances or special permissions for properties that existed before the HOA? Frank's eyes lit up. You should go to the county clerk's office. They keep records of all the original plat maps and any modifications made over the years. If your property had any special designations, it would be in those records. The next morning, I took a personal day from work and drove to the Jackson County Clerk's office in Medford. The building was an older structure with marble floors that echoed with every footstep. I approached the counter where a woman with reading glasses on a chain looked up from her computer. "I need to look at the original plat maps for Meadowbrook Estates in Ashland." "You have a parcel number?" I pulled out my property tax statement and gave her the information. She typed into her computer and then disappeared into a back room. 15 minutes later, she returned with a large rolled document and several folders. "You can use Table 3 over there. These are copies, but they're certified accurate. The original plat is from 1986. I carefully unrolled the large paper across the table. The map showed my street with each lot clearly marked. My property was Lot 14. I noticed immediately that there were handwritten notes in the margins and several stamps from various county departments. Then I saw it. In the bottom right corner of Lot 14, there was a small notation. Variance V 870342 approved 06/15/1987 for accessory wood storage structure and material. Below that was a small diagram showing the exact location where my woodpile currently sat. My heart started racing. I quickly opened the folders the clerk had given me. One contained the actual variance document. According to the papers, Mr. Henderson, the original owner, had applied for and received a permanent variance to store firewood in that specific location, because the natural grade of the property created a drainage issue anywhere else on the lot. The variance was granted before the house was even built and was supposed to run with the property in perpetuity. I took photos of everything with my phone and paid for certified copies of all the documents. The clerk processed my request and handed me an official envelope with the county seal. "These are legally certified copies," she said. "They hold the same weight as the originals in most proceedings." I drove home feeling victorious. This variance predated the HOA by 31 years. There was no way they could enforce their rule against something that had been legally permitted decades before they existed. I called the HOA management company again, and after another frustrating journey through automated menus, got the same disinterested representative. I found documentation that my property has a variance for firewood storage that predates your HOA, I said. All variances must be reapproved by the current HOA board. That's not how variances work. This runs with the property deed. Mr. Peterson, I'm just telling you what our policy is. You can present your documents at the next board meeting if you wish to dispute the fine. When is the next meeting? Next Tuesday at 7 at the community center. I marked it in my calendar. I had 5 days to prepare. That weekend, I decided to gather more information. I knocked on doors up and down my street, talking to neighbors about their experiences with the HOA. What I learned was disturbing. Mrs. Peterson, 3 houses down, had been fined for her garden gnome collection. She had displayed gnomes in her front yard for 15 years, but Susan decided they were visual clutter. The Johnsons at the corner had been cited for parking their boat in their driveway, even though they had been doing so for a decade. Mr. Chen received a violation for his basketball hoop, which his kids had been using since they were in elementary school. Every single case involved something that predated the HOA, and every person I spoke to was furious, but felt powerless. Most had just paid the fines because fighting seemed futile. She's trying to force out everyone who was here before, Mrs. Peterson said. She wants this whole street to look like those new houses at the end, cookie-cutter perfect. On Monday evening, Marcus called me back. Keith, I found what I was looking for. During your title search, there was a notation about that variance. The title company actually flagged it as a potential issue because the HOA covenants did not mention pre-existing variances. But the HOA was so new at the time that nobody really knew how it would play out. I should have pushed harder on that. I'm sorry. It's not your fault, but this variance is legitimate, right? Absolutely. It's recorded with the county and it runs with the deed. The HOA shouldn't be able to override it, but I'm not a lawyer. After hanging up, I decided I needed legal advice. I called several attorneys in Ashland and finally found one who specialized in property law and HOA disputes. Her name was Jennifer Martinez, and she agreed to see me first thing Tuesday morning. Jennifer's office was in a renovated Victorian house near downtown Ashland. She was in her 40s with sharp eyes that scanned my documents quickly. This is pretty straightforward, she said after reviewing everything. You have a recorded variance that predates the HOA. In Oregon, HOAs cannot invalidate existing legal variances or easements. They're trying to enforce a rule that doesn't apply to your property. So I just show them these documents and they'll back off. She laughed, but not in a mean way. I wish it were that simple. In my experience, HOA boards often dig in their heels even when they're clearly wrong. They don't like admitting mistakes, especially when someone like this Susan Carmichael is in charge. She sounds like she's on a power trip. What do I do? Go to the meeting tonight. Present your documents calmly and professionally. I'll draft a letter that you can give them outlining the legal basis for your variance. If they persist, we can file a complaint with the county or pursue legal action. Most importantly, do not pay the fine. Paying it could be interpreted as accepting the violation. She wrote up a letter on her firm's letterhead and charged me for an hour of consultation. I left her office feeling more confident. The community center was a bland building that served as a meeting space for various neighborhood groups. When I arrived at 6:45, the parking lot was already half full. I recognized several cars from my street. Inside, Metal folding chairs were arranged in rows facing a long table where the board members sat. Susan Carmichael was unmistakable. She was in her early 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair and an outfit that looked expensive. She shuffled papers and spoke in low tones with the other board members. I took a seat in the third row. Mrs. Peterson was 2 rows ahead, and she turned to give me an encouraging nod. The room filled up quickly, and by 7 o'clock, every seat was taken with people standing along the back wall. Susan called the meeting to order and went through standard administrative business. Approval of last month's minutes, a financial report, updates on landscaping contracts. She spoke in a clipped, efficient manner that brooked no disagreement. Then came the open forum for homeowner concerns. "We'll hear from residents who have submitted requests to speak," Susan said. "Please keep comments to 3 minutes." I had not submitted a request. I raised my hand. Susan looked at me with obvious irritation. "Did you fill out a speaker card?" "No, but I received a violation notice and was told I could address it at this meeting." "Violations are not discussed in open forum. You need to submit your appeal in writing." I stood up, holding my envelope of documents. "I was told by your management company that I could present my case here." The other board members looked uncomfortable. One of them, a younger man whose nameplate read David Porter, Treasurer, leaned over and whispered something to Susan. She pursed her lips. "Fine, you have 3 minutes." I walked to the front and faced the room. My hands were shaking slightly, but I kept my voice steady. "My name is Keith Peterson, and I live at 847 Maple Drive. I received a violation notice for firewood storage in what you call a non-compliant location. However, my property has a recorded variance from 1987, before this HOA existed, that specifically permits firewood storage in that exact location." I held up the certified documents. "This variance runs with the property deed and cannot be invalidated by HOA rules that came later." I handed copies of the variance and the attorney's letter to the board. Susan barely glanced at them. "Mr. Peterson, all properties in this development are subject to current HOA covenants. Previous arrangements do not supersede those covenants." "That's not correct under Oregon property law. A recorded variance predates and supersedes HOA rules." Susan's face flushed. "We are not going to have residents dictating policy to this board." "I'm not dictating policy. I'm asking you to recognize existing legal documentation." David, the treasurer, was actually reading the documents. His expression changed as he scanned the variance. "Susan, this looks legitimate. Maybe we should have our attorney review it before enforcing the fine." Susan snatched the papers from him. "This is a stalling tactic. The fine stands." A voice from the audience spoke up. It was Frank. "Susan, the man has a legal variance. You can't just ignore it because it's inconvenient." "Mr. Richardson, you are out of order." "I'm a homeowner at this meeting. I have every right to speak." Other people started voicing support. Mrs. Peterson stood up. "You've been targeting everyone who lived here before your HOA took over. This has to stop." The meeting devolved into chaos. People were shouting. Susan banged a gavel on the table so hard I thought it might break. "This meeting is adjourned," she yelled. "You can't adjourn in the middle of a discussion," David said. "I just did. Everyone needs to leave." As people filed out, several neighbors came up to me. They wanted copies of my documents and Jennifer's name. The mood was rebellious. Susan had pushed too far. The next morning, I received an email from the HOA management company. The fine was not only upheld but increased to $600 because I had caused a disruption at the board meeting. I forwarded the email to Jennifer. She called me within an hour. "They're being incredibly stupid. This is going to cost them a lot more than just backing down. I'm filing a formal complaint with the county today and sending them a demand letter. If they don't withdraw the fine within 10 business days, we'll file suit. How much is this going to cost me? I'll work on contingency for the main case. If we win, the HOA pays all legal fees. You just need to cover filing costs for now, which will be a few $100s. Over the next week, I documented everything. I took photos of my woodpile with timestamps. I collected statements from neighbors about how long the woodpile had been there. Frank even found old photos from neighborhood gatherings that showed the woodpile in the background going back years. Jennifer filed the complaint with Jackson County and sent a certified demand letter to the HOA. The letter laid out the legal case clearly. The variance was valid, recorded, and legally binding. The HOA had no authority to override it. If they did not withdraw the fine and violation within 10 days, we would seek damages and legal fees. The HOA's response came on day 9. It was a letter from their attorney, a firm in Medford called Thompson and Associates. The letter was dismissive. It claimed that all properties became subject to HOA covenants when the HOA was formed, regardless of previous variances. It cited several cases that supposedly supported their position. Jennifer read the letter and laughed. They cited cases from states with completely different property laws. This attorney either doesn't know Oregon law or is intentionally misleading them. This is good for us because it shows bad faith. She filed a lawsuit in Jackson County Circuit Court. The complaint sought not only dismissal of the fine, but also damages for harassment and attorney's fees. She also requested a declaratory judgment confirming the validity of my variance. The lawsuit got the HOA's attention. Within a week, I received a letter from Susan personally. It was typed on HOA letterhead, but had a handwritten note at the bottom. Mr. Peterson, I believe we can resolve this without litigation. Please contact me to discuss. Below was her personal cell phone number. I called Jennifer first. She wants to settle. Of course she does. Litigation is expensive and she knows they're going to lose. But don't talk to her without me present. She might try to get you to say something that hurts our case. Jennifer arranged a meeting at her office. Susan arrived with the HOA's attorney, a nervous-looking man in his 30s named Brad Thompson. David Porter, the treasurer, came too. "Thank you for meeting with us," Brad said. He seemed eager to avoid eye contact. "My clients want to resolve this matter amicably." "That's easy," Jennifer said. "Withdraw the fine, acknowledge the variance, and agree that no future boards can attempt to invalidate it." Susan finally spoke. "We're willing to withdraw the fine, but we want Mr. Peterson to relocate his woodpile to a less visible location." "No," I said. "The variance specifies that location for legitimate reasons related to drainage. I'm not moving it. This is about maintaining neighborhood aesthetics." "This is about you trying to override legal property rights," Jennifer said. "The variance is valid. Your personal aesthetic preferences are irrelevant." Brad shifted uncomfortably. "Susan, they have a strong case. We should probably just acknowledge the variance and move on." Susan glared at him. "I hired you to defend the HOA, not capitulate. I'm hired to give legal advice, and my advice is that we're going to lose badly if this goes to trial." David cleared his throat. "Susan, maybe we should have voted on this as a full board before taking it this far." "You agreed with my assessment at the meeting." "I agreed we should have our attorney review it. I never agreed to fight a clearly valid variance." The meeting went in circles for another hour. Finally, Brad suggested that they needed to caucus privately with their board. We agreed to reconvene in 3 days. During those 3 days, something unexpected happened. I received a visit from a county code enforcement officer named Michael Grant. He showed me his credentials and asked to look at my woodpile. I received a complaint that you have unpermitted structures on your property, he said. The woodpile. I have a variance for it. May I see it? I showed him the certified copies. He examined them carefully and then took photos with his county-issued tablet. This variance is absolutely valid, he said. I'm going to note that in my report. Who filed the complaint? I assume the HOA president, Susan Carmichael. He nodded knowingly. We've been getting a lot of complaints from her lately. Most of them are frivolous. She's wasting county resources. After he left, I called Jennifer and told her about the visit. She filed a false complaint with the county. That could actually be a legal problem for her personally. In Oregon, repeatedly filing false complaints can be considered harassment. The next day, Frank called me with news. Keith, you need to hear this. Susan has been going around trying to rally support to fight your lawsuit. She's telling people that if you win, everyone will start violating HOA rules and property values will plummet. That's ridiculous. It gets better. David called an emergency board meeting. He's making a motion to remove Susan as president. Apparently, he and the other board members are furious that she spent thousands of dollars on legal fees without board approval. The emergency board meeting was public, so I attended. The community center was packed again, but the energy was different. People seemed angry at Susan rather than the situation in general. David called the meeting to order. This emergency meeting has been called to address concerns about recent board decisions made without proper voting procedures. Susan tried to interrupt, but David cut her off. Susan, you'll have a chance to speak. First, I want to review the facts. Over the past 2 weeks, you authorized payment of over $8,000 to Thompson and Associates to fight Keith Peterson's variance claim. You did this without a board vote. I have discretionary authority as president. Not for amounts over $500. That's in our bylaws. You also filed a false complaint with county code enforcement, which reflects badly on this entire HOA. Another board member, a woman named Teresa Grant, spoke up. Susan, several of us have received calls from homeowners who are upset about how this has been handled. You're making decisions that affect all of us without consultation. I'm trying to maintain standards. You're targeting people who were here before the HOA existed, Frank called out from the audience. That's not maintaining standards. That's harassment. The meeting was tense. David made a formal motion to remove Susan as president. The vote was 4-1, with only Susan voting against. She was out. David was elected as the new president. His first act was to direct the HOA's attorney to drop all opposition to my variance claim. Keith, on behalf of the board, I apologize, he said, looking at me in the audience. Your variance is clearly valid. We're going to withdraw the fine, pay your legal fees, and make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. The room erupted in applause. Susan gathered her things and stormed out. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Susan personally, not on HOA letterhead. The letter was bizarre and rambling. She accused me of ruining her reputation and destroying the neighborhood. She claimed I owed her for the emotional distress I had caused. The letter ended with a threat. You will regret making an enemy of me. I immediately took the letter to Jennifer. She read it with growing concern. This is unhinged. You need to document this and consider filing for a restraining order if she escalates. You think she will? People who send letters like this are unpredictable. I also showed the letter to David in his capacity as HOA president. He was horrified. Keith, the board had no idea she was this unstable. I'm going to send her a cease and desist letter on behalf of the HOA. Her behavior is creating liability for all of us. That weekend, I was splitting more wood for the coming winter when a car pulled up in front of my house. Susan got out and marched across my lawn toward me. I straightened up, axe in hand, suddenly very aware that I was alone. "You destroyed everything I worked for," she said. Her face was red and her hands were shaking. "Susan, you need to leave my property. You know how many hours I spent trying to improve this neighborhood, and you just had to be difficult." I exercised my legal rights. "That's not being difficult. You turned everyone against me. You did that yourself by targeting people unfairly." She took a step closer. I tightened my grip on the axe, not threateningly, just because I genuinely felt nervous. "Susan, I'm asking you one more time to leave. If you don't, I'm calling the police." "Go ahead and call them. I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm standing on my feet talking to you." I pulled out my phone with my free hand and dialed 911. Susan stood there watching me with this unsettling intensity. "911, what's your emergency?" "I have someone on my property who I've asked to leave and she's refusing." The dispatcher took my information and said an officer would be there shortly. Susan still did not move. "You're really calling the police on me? This is pathetic. You came to my house uninvited and you're refusing to leave after being asked. That's trespassing." Finally, she seemed to realize the situation she had put herself in. She turned and walked back to her car, but not before saying, "This isn't over." An Ashland police officer arrived about 10 minutes later. I explained what had happened and showed him the threatening letter Susan had sent. He took notes and said he would pay her a visit to warn her about harassment and trespassing. "If she contacts you again, call us immediately," he said. "And you might want to get some security cameras." I took his advice. That afternoon, I drove to a home improvement store and bought a video doorbell and 2 outdoor security cameras. I spent the evening installing them and setting up the monitoring app on my phone. The next few days were quiet, but I felt on edge. Every car that drove by made me look up. Max picked up on my tension and stayed close. Then on Thursday evening, I got an alert from my doorbell camera. Someone was at my front door. I opened the app and saw Susan standing there with what looked like a manila envelope. She rang the doorbell. I did not answer but watched through the camera. She rang again, then bent down and slid the envelope under my door. She looked directly at the camera and said, "You've been served." After she left, I picked up the envelope. Inside was a lawsuit. Susan was suing me personally for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. She claimed that I had slandered her to neighbors and the HOA board, causing her removal as president and damaging her reputation. She was seeking $50,000 in damages. I could not believe what I was reading. I called Jennifer immediately. "She's suing me." "I didn't do anything to her. Email me the complaint right now." I scanned the documents and sent them over. Jennifer called back within an hour. "This is a SLAP suit. It stands for Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation. She's trying to punish you for exercising your legal rights. The good news is that Oregon has strong anti-SLAP laws. We can get this dismissed and she'll likely have to pay your attorney's fees for filing a frivolous lawsuit." "How long will that take?" "A few months, probably. But don't worry. This complaint is garbage. You told the truth to people who asked, and you presented facts to the HOA board. That's not defamation." Jennifer filed a special motion to dismiss under Oregon's anti-SLAP statute. The motion argued that Susan's lawsuit was retaliation for my protected activities and had no legal merit. We also filed a counterclaim against Susan for abuse of process and harassment. The legal proceedings dragged on through November and December. Susan's attorney, who was different from the HOA's attorney, filed responses that were increasingly desperate. They could not point to any specific false statements I had made because I had not made any. In January, we had a hearing before Judge Patricia Morrison in Jackson County Circuit Court. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with dark wood paneling and fluorescent lights. Susan sat at the plaintiff's table with her attorney. I sat with Jennifer at the defense table. Judge Morrison was a woman in her 60s with gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. She had clearly read all the filings because she started asking pointed questions immediately. "Counselor," she said to Susan's attorney, "where in your complaint do you identify any false statements made by Mr. Peterson?" "Your Honor, Mr. Peterson engaged in a campaign to turn the HOA board and neighbors against my client." "By doing what specifically?" "Showing them a recorded variance, presenting facts to the board." He made her look incompetent. Making someone look incompetent by presenting facts is not defamation. Do you have any evidence that Mr. Peterson made false statements of fact? "He told people she was targeting homeowners unfairly." "Was she targeting homeowners unfairly?" The attorney hesitated. "She was enforcing HOA rules, including rules that violated existing legal variances. That's a matter of interpretation." Judge Morrison removed her glasses and looked at the attorney with obvious displeasure. "Counselor, I've reviewed the variance documents in this case. There's no interpretation needed. It's a valid recorded variance." "Your client attempted to fine Mr. Peterson for something he had every legal right to do. When he defended himself, she launched a retaliatory lawsuit. This is textbook SLAPP behavior." "Your Honor, my client has suffered genuine emotional distress." "If she has, it's because of her own actions, not Mr. Peterson's. I'm granting the special motion to dismiss. This case is frivolous and appears to be intended to harass the defendant." "Mr. Peterson, do you have an attorney's fees motion prepared?" Jennifer stood. "Yes, Your Honor. We've submitted our fee documentation. We're also pursuing our counterclaim for harassment and abuse of process. I'll review the fee request. As for the counterclaim, that will proceed separately. Miss Carmichael, I strongly suggest you reconsider continuing this litigation. You are not going to prevail and you're going to end up owing a lot of money." Susan stood up, ignoring her attorney's hand on her arm. "This is outrageous. He ruined my life. Miss Carmichael, sit down and let your attorney speak for you." "No. Everyone is taking his side because he found some old paperwork. I was trying to make the neighborhood better and he made me look like a villain." "Miss Carmichael, I'm not going to warn you again. Sit down." Susan's attorney finally got her to sit, but she was crying now, loud, angry sobs that echoed in the courtroom. Judge Morrison called a brief recess. When we returned, Susan had composed herself, but she looked defeated. The judge issued her ruling from the bench. The lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice, meaning it could not be refiled. Susan would have to pay my attorney's fees, which had climbed to nearly $12,000. Jennifer also scheduled a hearing on our counterclaim for the following month. As we left the courthouse, Susan's attorney stopped us in the hallway. "Can we talk settlement on the counterclaim?" "What are you offering?" Jennifer asked. "My client will agree to stay away from Mr. Peterson and not contact him in any way. In exchange, you drop the counterclaim. And the attorney's fees from the SLAPP suit, she'll have to pay those. Judge's order." Jennifer looked at me. "It's your call." I thought about it. I could pursue more money from Susan, but what I really wanted was for this entire thing to be over. "I want a formal written agreement that she'll have no contact with me. Any violation and we can immediately get a restraining order without having to prove a new case. I think we can work that out." We spent another 30 minutes in a conference room at the courthouse, hammering out a settlement agreement. Susan would pay my attorney's fees from the dismissed lawsuit, stay at least 100 yards away from me and my property, and have no direct or indirect contact with me. Any violation would result in immediate entry of a restraining order and open her up to contempt charges. In exchange, I would dismiss the counterclaim. Susan signed the agreement without looking at me. Her hand shook as she wrote her name. After everything was finalized, Jennifer and I walked to a nearby coffee shop. I bought her a latte as a small thank you. "You handled that well," she said. "A lot of people would have wanted to squeeze every penny out of her. I just want my life back. I want to split firewood and not worry about crazy people showing up at my house." "Understandable. Just make sure you keep those security cameras running. People like Susan sometimes can't help themselves." Over the next few weeks, life slowly returned to normal. David, the new HOA president, proved to be reasonable and communicative. He sent a letter to all homeowners explaining that the board would respect pre-existing variances and legal property uses. He also implemented a new policy requiring board votes for any fines over $100 and any legal expenditures. Several neighbors who had been targeted by Susan came forward with their issues. Mrs. Peterson was told her garden gnomes were perfectly fine. The Johnsons could keep their boat in the driveway. Mr. Chen's basketball hoop was not a violation. Frank came over one Saturday with a 6-pack of local craft beer. We sat on my back porch looking at the woodpile that had started this whole mess. "You did good, Keith," he said. "Standing up to bullies is hard. I just wanted to keep my firewood where it made sense. It was bigger than that. Susan would have kept pushing people around if someone hadn't pushed back. Now the whole neighborhood is better for it." We drank our beers and talked about normal things like the upcoming trout season and whether the Blazers had any chance of making the playoffs. It felt good to have boring conversations again. In March, I received a check from Susan for my attorney's fees. It cleared without issue. That same week, I saw her at a grocery store in Ashland. She was in the produce section squeezing avocados. When she noticed me, her face went pale. She quickly pushed her cart in the opposite direction. I did not feel satisfaction or vindication. I just felt relieved that it was truly over. The incident did have one positive outcome I had not anticipated. My story spread through the neighborhood and then to other nearby HOA developments. I started getting calls and emails from people in similar situations, asking for advice. I shared Jennifer's contact information with several of them and gave them copies of the variance documents and legal reasoning that had worked in my case. One man, living in a development in Medford, had a grandfather clause that allowed him to keep chickens even though the HOA tried to ban them. Another woman in Phoenix had a recorded easement for a shed that the HOA claimed violated setback requirements. In both cases, having a template for fighting back made all the difference. Jennifer told me she had seen a notable increase in HOA cases where homeowners were standing up for themselves. "You started something," she said. "People are realizing they don't have to just accept whatever the HOA tells them." By April, spring had arrived in full force. My woodpile, which had caused so much trouble, was nearly depleted from the winter. I would need to order more soon and start splitting for next year. The pile would go in the exact same spot, of course. The spot designated by a legal variance, approved by the county, and now confirmed by the courts. David stopped by one evening to check in. As HOA president, he was trying to rebuild trust and actually get to know the homeowners. "How are things going?" he asked. "Good, quiet," which is exactly how I like it. I wanted to apologize again for how the board handled everything. We should have looked at your variance immediately and saved everyone a lot of trouble and money. It's not your fault. Susan was the one who pushed it. True, but we enabled her by not asking harder questions. We've learned from it. The board is completely different now. We're focused on actual community needs, not someone's personal aesthetic vision. That's good to hear. We're actually thinking about dissolving the HOA altogether. A lot of the longtime residents never wanted it in the first place. The only reason it exists is because the developer of those new houses at the end required it. We're exploring whether we can break off that section as its own HOA and let the rest of the street go back to being independent. That would be interesting. Keep me posted. After he left, I stood in my backyard and looked at my property. It was not fancy or particularly well manicured. The grass needed mowing, and some of the garden beds were overgrown. But it was mine, and I had the right to use it within the law without someone else's arbitrary rules being imposed on me. Max came bounding out of the house with a tennis ball, his eternal optimism on full display. I threw the ball and watched him chase it with pure joy. Simple pleasures. That's what life should be about. In May, I received an unexpected letter. It was from the Oregon State Bar Association. Susan's behavior had attracted their attention, and they were investigating Brad Thompson, the attorney who had initially advised the HOA to fight my variance claim. According to the letter, they were looking into whether he had provided competent legal counsel or had misled his client about the strength of their case. I was asked to provide a statement about my interactions with him. I wrote an honest account. Brad had seemed nervous and out of his depth, and he had cited cases from other states that were not relevant to Oregon law. However, I also noted that he had ultimately recommended settling and acknowledging my variance, which showed he eventually recognized the legal reality. I never heard the outcome of that investigation, but I hoped it served as a learning experience rather than a career-ending event. Everyone makes mistakes. The question is whether you correct them or double down on them. Susan, according to neighborhood gossip, had moved to California to live with her daughter. Nobody was sad to see her go. The house she had lived in sold quickly to a young couple with a toddler. They introduced themselves to me one Saturday morning, mentioning that they had heard about the HOA drama. "We almost didn't buy here because of it," the husband said. "But then we heard how it was resolved and that the new board is reasonable." That actually made us feel better about the neighborhood. By June, the legal bills were fully paid, the settlements were complete, and all the documents were filed away in a folder I hoped never to open again. Jennifer sent me a final bill showing a zero balance and a handwritten note. "Congratulations on your victory. Feel free to call if Susan violates the agreement, but I suspect she's done." I framed the certified copy of my variance and hung it in my garage. It was a reminder that sometimes standing up for your rights is difficult and expensive and time-consuming, but it matters. Not just for you, but for everyone who comes after. One evening in July, I was invited to a neighborhood barbecue that Frank was hosting. The entire street came out. Kids played in sprinklers, adults drank beer and lemonade, and someone set up a volleyball net in Frank's backyard. It was the kind of community gathering that should happen more often. David pulled me aside at one point. "I wanted to update you on the HOA dissolution. We've got enough votes from homeowners to proceed. We're meeting with an attorney next week to start the paperwork. By the end of the year, the original part of this street will be free of HOA restrictions. That's great news. It's because you fought back." People saw that standing up was possible. I shook my head. I was just trying to keep my woodpile where it was. Sometimes that's all it takes. One person saying no, this isn't right, and actually following through. As summer faded into fall, I began the annual ritual of preparing firewood for winter. I ordered 3 cords and spent weekends splitting and stacking. The pile grew in its designated spot, legal and uncontested. Neighbors would walk by and wave. Some would stop to chat. Mrs. Peterson brought me cookies one afternoon, claiming she had made too many and did not want them to go to waste. Mr. Chen's teenage son asked if he could borrow my axe to split some wood for their fireplace. I taught him the proper technique and safety measures. Life had returned to a comfortable rhythm. The drama and stress of the HOA fight felt distant, almost like it had happened to someone else. But I knew it had changed me in subtle ways. I was more aware of my rights, more willing to question authority, and more committed to helping others who faced similar situations. In October, exactly 1 year after I had found that orange violation notice on my door, I sat on my back porch with a fire crackling in my outdoor fireplace. The wood came from my pile, dried and ready, stored in the location approved by variance V870342 granted on June 15, 1987. Max was curled up at my feet, snoring softly. The air was crisp with the promise of winter. Smoke rose from chimneys up and down the street. Inside the house, I had soup simmering on the stove. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, my real estate agent. "Hey Keith, just wanted to check in. How's everything going with the house?" I typed back. "Everything is perfect." And it was. Not because the house was perfect or the neighborhood was perfect or my life was perfect, but because I had fought for my right to live peacefully in my home and I had won. The victory was not just legal, it was personal. It was about self-respect and community and refusing to be bullied. The woodpile sat in its corner, a monument to the power of documentation, persistence, and standing up for yourself. Every log in that pile represented more than just fuel for my fireplace. It represented proof that individuals can challenge institutions, that old documents matter, that rights have meaning. As darkness fell and the stars emerged above Ashland, I added another log to the fire and watched the sparks rise into the night sky. Somewhere in California, Susan was probably starting over, hopefully learning from her mistakes. Somewhere in Medford, Jennifer was preparing for her next case, armed with another successful precedent. Somewhere on my street, families were settling in for the evening, secure in the knowledge that their HOA would treat them fairly. And I was here in my backyard, enjoying my woodpile. The end of the story was not dramatic or cinematic. There were no final confrontations or shocking revelations. The resolution came through the mundane processes of law and bureaucracy, through documents and hearings and settlements. But that was okay. Most real victories are not spectacular. They are quiet affirmations that the system, for all its flaws, can still work when people engage with it honestly and persistently. The variance document, yellowed with age but still legally binding, had been my shield. The Oregon property laws, sometimes arcane and difficult to navigate, had been my sword. And the community of neighbors, tired of being pushed around, had been my army. In the end, I learned that home ownership is not just about property. It is about community, about standing up for what is right, and about understanding that your rights end where another person's begin, but they should not end before that point just because someone with a title decides to exceed their authority. Winter came on strong that year. Snow fell early and often, unusual for Ashland. My woodpile proved its worth, keeping my house warm through December and January. Every time I carried logs inside, I thought briefly about the fight they had caused and felt grateful it was over. The neighborhood thrived under David's leadership. The HOA, soon to be dissolved entirely for our section of the street, functioned minimally and non-intrusively. Decisions were made transparently with input from homeowners. Fines were rare and only issued for genuine problems like overgrown trees threatening power lines or legitimate safety hazards. I never saw Susan again. I heard through the grapevine that she had gotten involved with a homeowners association in her California community and had already clashed with several residents. Some people never learn, but that was not my problem anymore. On Christmas Eve, I hosted a small gathering at my house. Frank came along with Mrs. Peterson, the Johnsons, Mr. Chen and his family, and David with his wife. We ate ham and roasted vegetables and drank too much wine. The conversation was light and easy, full of laughter and stories. At one point, Frank raised his glass. "I want to propose a toast to Keith, who reminded us all that standing up for yourself is worth it, and to reasonable people who can admit when they are wrong. May we all have less drama and more common sense in the coming year." Everyone clinked glasses. I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fireplace. As my guests left, bundled against the cold, they each thanked me for hosting. Mrs. Peterson hugged me and whispered, "You are a good neighbor, Keith." Max and I cleaned up the dishes and leftovers. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and quiet. I turned off the lights and stood at my back window, looking at my property covered in white. The woodpile was a dark rectangle against the snow, solid and permanent. I thought about the past year and everything that had happened. The anger and frustration of receiving that first violation notice. The discovery of the variance. The conflict with Susan. The legal battles. The final resolution. It had been exhausting and expensive and stressful, but I would do it all again if I had to. Because some things are worth fighting for. Your home, your rights, your peace of mind, your community. These are not abstract concepts. They are daily realities that shape the quality of your life. The clock on my wall struck midnight. Christmas Day had arrived. Max was already asleep on his bed in the corner. I added one more log to the fireplace, watching as the flames consumed the dry wood, turning it into heat and light. Outside, Ashland slept under its blanket of snow. Inside, I was warm and safe and at peace. The woodpile that had started it all would last through February at least. Come spring, I would order more. The cycle would continue, year after year, in the same location, protected by a variance granted before I was born. That was the real victory. Not the court decisions or the settlement agreements. The real victory was being able to live my life without harassment, to make reasonable choices about my property, and to know that I had the backing of the law when those choices were questioned. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, Max following behind me. Tomorrow would be Christmas, a day for rest and reflection. But tonight, on Christmas Eve, I felt profound gratitude. Gratitude for good neighbors. Gratitude for competent legal counsel. Gratitude for property laws that protected individual rights. Gratitude for the courage to stand up when standing up was hard. The house settled around me with familiar creaks and groans. This old house, built in 1987, had sheltered generations before me, and would shelter generations after. And through it all, that variance would remain, a testament to the importance of documentation and the enduring nature of legal rights properly established. I fell asleep quickly, dreamless and content. When I woke on Christmas morning, the sun was shining and the snow had stopped. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, watching chickadees at the bird feeder outside my window. My phone rang. It was my sister calling from Seattle to wish me Merry Christmas. We talked for an hour about family and work and her kids. She asked about the HOA situation, having heard bits and pieces over the months. "It's done," I told her. "Completely resolved. I'm glad." "You sounded so stressed every time we talked about it." "It was worth the stress. I learned a lot about standing up for myself." After we hung up, I realized that was the truth. The whole ordeal had been a kind of education. I now knew more about property law, HOA, variances, and the legal system than I ever expected to learn. That knowledge would serve me well for the rest of my life. The years that followed were blessedly uneventful. The HOA dissolved as planned. Property values remained stable. The neighborhood maintained its character without heavy-handed enforcement of arbitrary rules. People painted their houses different colors, planted diverse gardens, and generally lived their lives without interference. I continued splitting wood every fall and burning it every winter. The pile remained in its designated spot, undisputed and undisturbed. New neighbors moved in over time, and I would tell them the story of the variance when they asked about the woodpile. It became a kind of neighborhood legend, the tale of how one homeowner stood up to an overreaching HOA and won. But more importantly, it became a lesson about the importance of documentation, persistence, and knowing your rights. Several neighbors followed my example in their own situations, using old permits and variances to defend their choices against various forms of bureaucratic overreach. The community grew stronger through these small acts of resistance and self-advocacy. We learned to work together, to share information, and to support each other when someone faced an unfair challenge. That was Susan's unintended legacy. She had tried to control the neighborhood through fear and fines, but instead, she had united us in defense of our individual freedoms. Looking back now, I can see that the whole experience, as difficult as it was, made me a better homeowner and a better neighbor. I learned that rights mean nothing if you are not willing to defend them. I learned that communities thrive when people respect each other's legitimate choices. And I learned that sometimes the smallest things, like a pile of firewood, can become symbols of much larger principles. My woodpile was never just about having fuel for my fireplace. It became about the right to use your property as you see fit within the law. It became about resisting arbitrary authority. It became about the importance of historical documentation and legal continuity. It became about community solidarity in the face of unreasonable demands. And in the end, it became about winning. Not in a petty or vindictive way, but in the sense of justice being served. The law worked as it should. The documents I needed were available and authentic. The courts recognized the validity of my claim. The community supported the right outcome. The system, imperfect as it is, functioned properly. That is all anyone can ask for. Not perfection, but fairness. Not favoritism, but equal application of the rules. Not emotional decisions, but rational evaluation of facts and law. I got all of that, and Susan did not, because she was on the wrong side of all those principles. As I finish writing this account, another fall has arrived. My woodpile is stacked and ready. Max, now a bit grayer around the muzzle, still greets me enthusiastically when I come home. The neighborhood remains peaceful. And somewhere in my filing cabinet, that variance document sits in its folder, ready if I ever need it again. But I do not think I will need it. The lesson has been learned by everyone involved. Respect property rights. Check documentation before making accusations. Think carefully before starting fights you cannot win. And remember that sometimes the person you are trying to push around will push back harder than you expected. Those are good lessons for anyone, whether they are an HOA president or just a regular homeowner trying to live their life in peace. I learned them the hard way, but I learned them well. And that knowledge, more than any pile of firewood, will keep me warm for years to come.